Orcust. One of the most dominant decks of 2019, being top tier for basically the entire year, all the way up until January of 2020, when it ran into, finally, an enemy it could not defeat, the ban list. The OCG and TCG went about it a bit differently, the TCG by straight up banning the deck's most important card, and the OCG and Master Duel by just limiting a whole bunch of them, but the end result was the same. Orcust was unceremoniously kicked out of the top tier of decks, thus far, never to return. But just because this deck is no longer one of the very best, doesn't mean it's not playable. Konami's ban list goons may have taken out the Orcusts into a dark alley and beaten them up, but they didn't break the deck's kneecaps, meaning it still has legs to stand on. I'm Sophie apparently, and this is the Orcust deck I got to Platinum 1 with back in February. I want to show you why this deck, despite losing a lot, is not dead yet. It is still a viable strategy, and it can still take you up the ranks in Master Duel. If you're someone newer who wasn't playing back when it was absolutely everywhere, Orcusts are a deck of dark machine-type monsters that don't do much on field or in hand, but can banish themselves from the graveyard for powerful effects, usually summoning more Orcust monsters. In addition, the Link monsters have powerful effects they can activate by shuffling banished machine monsters back into your deck. That means the deck is formed a self-contained resource loop, where you banish your main deck monsters to get powerful swarming effects, and then shuffle them back with the links in order to regain your resources to keep going next turn. Put it all together, and you still have a competent mid-range strategy that can put out a strong board turn 1, but also has the ability to grind out over several turns against slow decks. So, with that out of the way, let's go through the card by card and look at this in more detail. I'm going to start with the most important monsters. The absolute heart and soul of the deck, the card that makes it tick, is Orcust Horror. You can banish this card from your graveyard to summon an Orcust monster from your deck, but you cannot summon monsters for the rest of the turn except dark monsters. All of the Orcusts come with this dark lock, but it's not really a huge deal cause I don't know if you've noticed, but there are a lot of good dark monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Horror is a crazy card. Anything that says banish this from grave to summon from deck has gotta be good, and this is absolutely no exception. You want to get this into grave early, you want to recycle it as many times as possible, because all of your plays start with this little guy. Next, we have some other Orcusts that are similar to this, but not quite as good. Symbol Skeleton can be banished from grave to summon an Orcust monster from your graveyard, and again locks you into dark monsters for the turn. Symbol Skeleton I play 2 of. Playing 3 is excessive, you don't want to play too many Orcusts because drawing into them is quite bad. But I think you want to play more than 1. You do have ways to get back Orcusts that are banished, but they're kind of limited and you don't want to have to use them on Symbol Skeleton, because you'd rather be using them on something like Hulk. Still, Symbol Skeleton is an extremely powerful card, it extends your plays immensely, and I don't think you can get away playing less than 2. Next is Orcust Nightmare. This card can be banished from the graveyard to target a monster on the field, and give that monster a small attack boost, but more importantly, send a Dark Machine monster from your deck to the graveyard. The fact that you need a monster on the field isn't a huge deal, because you can just target an opponent's monster if you need to, and the attack boost doesn't really matter. The important part here is that this is a Foolish Burial effect, in a deck that gets to full combo off any single Foolish Burial. That is pretty incredible setup. Orcust Nightmare is great. Again, you want to run 2 because you want to have it in rotation, but you don't want to have to use your recycling effects to get it back from the banished zone. One important detail about Orcust Nightmare is that it doesn't need to send an Orcust monster. It can send any Dark Machine, which means it can send World Legacy World Wand. This card is just an honorary Orcust. When it's in the graveyard, you can banish it to target a banished Orcust monster and special summon it. Outside of your Link monsters, This is the only in-engine way you have to get back banished monsters, and it is a darn good one. Most often what you want to do with World Wand is banish it to summon back your Harp Horror to be able to put it in grave again for next turn, but it can also just act as an additional extender by summoning back whatever Orcust you have banished. It's important to note, the fact that this card does not say Orcust in the name can make things a little bit awkward. It limits the plays you can do with it, so be careful of that. That's really why we can't play more than one of it, but this is an incredibly powerful card. The last Orcust monster we have is Orcust Brass Bombard. We only play one of this one because it's by far the worst, but it lets you banish itself to summon an Orcust monster from hand. That's usually pretty bad, but I think you need to play it because it unbricks a lot of hands where you draw into awkward things. For example, if you draw into Harp Horror, you can often struggle to combo off without an easy way to get it into grave, but Brass Bombard does that for you nicely. It is good enough in those edge cases that I think it's worth playing. I've lied to you about that being the last Orcust monster though, because they do have one more card, which also happens to be one of the nuttiest pieces of legacy support I've ever seen. When Gilsu the Orcust Mech Knight is summoned, you can Foolish Burial an Orcust or World Legacy monster from your deck. Also, if you control no other monsters, it lets you summon a level 1 token to both players' sides of the field. This card is absolutely nutty. It's limited for good reason. This is not only grave setup, but also a free extender by itself if you have it on an empty board. This guy is normally what you're gonna summon off of Harp Horror in order to get another Send to Graveyard, and if you happen to draw into him, is your best combo starter. So, with all the Orcusts gone, let's move on to the second part of the monsters, the Foolish Burials. Gilsu is the first one, alongside one Armageddon Knight, which sends a Dark monster from deck to grave on summon, 3 Scrap Recycler, which does the same for machine monsters, 1 Scrap Raptor, which searches Scrap Recycler, and 2 Dark Grepher, which can discard a Dark monster to send a Dark monster from deck to grave. The important thing about these cards is that opening any one of them is 4 combo. Obviously in the case of Dark Grepher, you also need a discard, but you have a lot of those, and any of the other ones, just normal summoning it gets you everything you can possibly want. Sending a Harp Horror to the graveyard is incredibly powerful, and just gets you all the way off to the races, so that's why we're playing so many cards that do exactly that. Finally, for the monsters, we have 7 hand traps in 3 Ash Blossom, 3 Maxi, and 1 Veiler. This Veiler can really be anything, it's just the best card I had to fill the 40th slot in the deck. And then 1 Phantom Knights of Silent Boots, which we go into for Rusty Bardiche setups that I'll talk about later. As for the spells, we have 1 Monster Reborn, 1 Foolish Burial for obvious reasons, 1 Rhoda because it searches our Foolish Burial guys, 1 World Legacy Succession because it's a pretty good extender, 2 Orchestrated Return, which lets you send an Orcust or World Legacy monster from your hand or field to grave to draw 2. This card is nice if you draw into Orcusts, and can sometimes just get rid of a dead guy at the end of your combo to draw some, but it's not good enough to play 3, I just don't think you're on enough Orcust monsters to justify that. After that, we have 3 Pot of Prosperity. Now, it may seem weird to be running Prosperity alongside a draw spell, but I think it is important to do so. This card is very good in a deck that can combo off so hard off of any number of 1-card starters. So you really just want cards that dig you through your deck to make sure you always find a starter. And Prosperity is the absolute best card in the game at doing that. This card is incredible, I would never cut it. Then we have 2 Twin Twister for back row matchups, 2 Called by the Grave to deal with those pesky hand traps that give you so much trouble, and 1 Orchestrated Babble, which is a nutty card. Babble is a field spell that lets you activate the effects of Orcust monsters as quick effects. That is incredibly good with your grave effects, letting you activate things like Harp Horror during your opponent's turn, in order to generate tons of advantage by effectively getting to use your summon effects twice as much as you should be. Worth noting, while this card is absolutely crazy for generating advantage through more summons or the effects of your Link monsters, World Legacy World Wand is not an Orcust and does not become a quick effect so make sure to plan around that. I've burned myself with that a couple times. Rounding out the main deck, we have 3 trap cards. One Orcust Crescendo, which is searchable, which is why we only play one of this, as well as one of Babel. Crescendo is an Omni-negate if you control an Orcust Link monster, and then can be banished from the graveyard to add a Dark Machine monster from your hand, from your deck, or banished zone. This card is crazy. I mean, it's an Infernity Barrier that's also a search on the next turn. Important to note, if you do use the search effect, you can only summon Dark Machine monsters during that turn, and unlike the other Orcust cards, that is for the entire turn, not just the rest of this turn, meaning using Crescendo's search effect can be pretty awkward because it cuts you off of some combo lines. Still, this is an absolutely cracked card, and you need to play it, and thanks to the search ability the deck has, which we'll get to in a minute in the extra deck, you don't need to play more than one. Finally, we have 2 Phantom Knight's Fogblade, which can negate the effect of a monster on the field and prevent it from attacking. We run 2 because we can search 2 off of the Rusty Bardiche setup, and getting 2 negates for basically free is really good. Next up, we have the extra deck, where the real magic happens. I'm gonna start off with the most important one here, Galatea the Orcust Automaton. This card can be made using any 2 monsters, including at least 1 Orcust, and when linked, it cannot be destroyed by battle, and you can shuffle a banished machine monster back into your deck to set an Orcust spell trap directly from your deck. This is the searcher I'm talking about. This gets you to your power cards like Babel and Crescendo, and can even be used again on your opponent's turn with Babel to search even more. Galatea is by far the best card in the extra deck. I understand why Konami limited it, but it does make me a little sad because she is so good and you really do miss a second copy. But this card is crazy. The other crazy Orcust extra deck card is Dingirsu the Orcust of the Evening Star. This is a rank 8 Xyz, but it can also be Xyz summoned by just using an Orcust link as material, just completely ignoring the rules of Xyz summoning. That makes it incredibly easy to summon out, just childishly easy, and as soon as you do, you get very powerful effects. When Dingirsu is summoned, you can either send one card your opponent controls to the graveyard, which does not target, or you can attach a banished machine monster to it as material. So on summon, this card is either a non-targeting removal spell, or resource recycling, both of which are very strong, and in addition, if any card you control would be destroyed, you can detach one material from Dingirsu instead. This guy does absolutely everything for the deck. Its removal, its extension, its protection, its attack power in a deck that doesn't have that many big monsters. Just an unbelievable card. I played 2. You could technically get away with 1, but I highly recommend getting the second copy. It comes up a lot. Then we have 1 Link Karibo. This card is relevant for 2 scenarios. 1, if you draw Brass Bombard and another Orcust, you can summon the Brass Bombard, link it off for Link Karibo, banish it to summon whatever other Orcust from hand, and you're off to the races. Or, if you are able to summon Girsu on an empty board, you can turn the token Girsu summons into an effect monster, letting you go into Galatea. Then we have Gravity Controller, which is theoretically nice in some niche situations where you want to get a monster attached to Dingirsu into the graveyard to revive, but you don't need to play this, it's pretty bad. Then we have a Nightmare package of Cerberus, Phoenix, and Unicorn. Worth noting, Cerberus and Unicorn are not dark, so you can't summon them after using Orcust effects, but Unicorn is, meaning you can go into this after you started your combo. Then we have IP Masquerena, a powerful card to end on, Barricade Borg Blocker, which lets you freely discard any Orcusts that are dead in hand, and then Longirsu the Orcust Orchestrator. This card lets you target 2 of your banished machine monsters, shuffle them into deck, and send 1 linked monster your opponent controls to the graveyard. So that can be either a monster Longirsu points to, or any monster your opponent has pointed to by their own link monsters. Like Dingirsu, this removal is non-targeting, making Longirsu a very powerful removal option, but it cannot attack the turn you use the effect, so make sure to plan around that. Also worth noting with Langirsu and Galatea as well, the secondary effects to set an Orcust spell trap or to send a monster to the graveyard are optional, which means you can always shuffle back banished monsters even if the rest of the effect can't resolve, and that does come up sometimes if, say, your opponent doesn't have a monster to Langirsu to hit, but you still need some banished guys back in rotation. Then we have Phantom Knights of Rusty Bardiche, and this is the best card in the extra deck. Just an unbelievable powerful Yu-Gi-Oh card. Bardiche, in case you don't know, lets you send a Phantom Knights monster from your deck to the grave and set a Phantom Knights spell trap directly from deck. That means you can set a Fogblade, which is a negate, by sending Silent Boots, which searches another Fogblade, meaning this guy sets up 2 negates, as well as a second effect to pop a card if you summon a Dark Xyz monster to his zone, which Langirsu fits the bill of perfectly. That means this card is a very, very easy 2 negate setup, and potentially additional value, which is very powerful. Just remember that Bardiche cannot be used as link material, so you can't climb further after this. Regardless of that, you always want to make this guy turn 1, he's very strong. Next up, Topologic Bomber Dragon. The Topologics are really cool cards in this deck. They all have powerful field wipe type effects that activate if a monster is summoned to its zone. That is very easy to do, with Babel letting you summon Orcust at quick speed on your opponent's turn. Bomber Dragon lets you wipe all monsters if you do that, Topologic Zero Boros banishes all cards on the field, and Topologic Trisbana banishes all back row. I think Zero Boros and Trisbana are stronger cards than Bomber, but I don't own them. So, really you can play whatever Topologics you like, because they do give you really, really powerful disruption alongside Babel. Rounding out the extra deck, we have the Unloved Boss Monster of Orcust, or Custrion, which is unloved because, well, it sucks. The effect is really costly, requiring 3 banished machine monsters shuffled back, and it requires all of your opponent's monsters to be linked, making it pretty unreliable. Don't play this card, I just needed a 15th card and I don't know, it's kinda funny. And lastly, an access code toggle to help kill. Conveniently, this is a dog. Alright, so with that, that's all the cards in the deck. Now let me go show you how it plays in practice so you can get more of a feel for the combos. Okay, so the most basic combo you need to be familiar with to play Orcust is the setup you can do off of one single starter. This can be Armageddon Knight, Dark Greffel, Foolish Burial, or in this case, Scrap Recycler. What you're going to want to do is summon your starter, and use its effect to send an Orcust Nightmare from your deck to the graveyard. Once that's done, you can use the Nightmare effect, banishing it in order to Foolish Burial again for your Orcust Harp Horror. Now you may be wondering here why we even bothered sending the Nightmare first, as opposed to just sending Harp directly with the Recycler, and that's because it is useful to get one extra Orcust banished in order to have more material to use for your Link Monster's effects later down the line. So, with Harp Horror engraved, we can go ahead and banish that in order to summon an Orcust monster from deck, and what you're going to do here, almost always, is going to be the boy himself, Girsu. Girsu, on summon, is going to let you Foolish Burial yet again, this time sending the World Legacy World Wand. And now at this point, you're going to want to World Wand, summoning back the Harp Horror. This is important because now we can get the Harp Horror into Graveyard to be able to use it again this turn, or next turn rather, by linking it off alongside Scrap Recycler in order to go into Orcust Galatea. Now we had to do this in this specific order, so that when we use Galatea effect to search a spell trap, we can shuffle back the World Wand. You always want to put back World Wand when possible, because it is the hardest card to recycle from the banished zone. World Wand can get back any of your banished Orcusts, but it can't get back itself. So you want to make sure you're using the Link monsters to do that, so you keep the wand in rotation. As for the set for Galatea, generally you're going to go for Orchestrated Babel. So that's going to get set onto the field, And then, at the end here, we have 3 material left over, which is just enough to go into a Phantom Knights of Rusty Bardiche. Then Bardiche is going to end the combo by letting us add a Fog Blade to hand, send a Silent Boots to grave, banish the Silent Boots to search a second copy of Fog Blade, and leave us with an end setup of 2 negate traps set, Babble online with Harp Horror and Grave, letting us generate more advantage on our opponent's turn, plus an extra Rusty Bardiche and Banished Orcust left over. And it's worth noting, the setup may not look too impressive, but it's almost always enough to survive your opponent's turn, and it's also something you did with only 1 card. In a real game, you still have cards in your hand that's usually gonna be powerful things like hand traps for more disruption, or Card by the Grave, or more extenders or follow-up for next turn in the form of things like Brass Bombard or another starter to do it again on the next turn. This combo does have some variations. For instance, if you have a way to put Simple Skeleton into the graveyard, you can revive your Galatea at the end of the combo, meaning you can search Crescendo instead of Babble, and have an extra negate. That can be a little risky depending on your hand, because it doesn't leave you with as much grave setup to make more plays next turn, but it does make your starting board stronger. So, I can't really show you any more specific combos, because unfortunately, Orcust is the type of deck that doesn't really have that many linear combos. Everything else kind of builds off of that 1 card setup, or depends a lot on your hand. Just know that when you want to kill your opponent, you often want to do it by setting up a board of Access Kotaka plus Dengirsu, plus something else, because annoyingly that is 7,900 damage, because Konami hates me personally, but you can easily find the extra damage by using Fog Blade's Grave effect to revive a Rusty Bardiche, which is the other nice part of playing the Phantom Knight engine. So now that all that combo stuff's out of the way, I want to talk a little bit more broadly about the strengths and weaknesses of this deck and whether you should consider playing it while we watch some gameplay. So to start off, the strengths. Number 1, this deck is quite consistent. You only need 1 card to go off on your full combo, and you have a ton of cards that do it, meaning you see very few hands that you can't do anything with. Number 2, you have a very strong grind game and a decent combo setup, making this deck very versatile. You can often end games pretty quickly as soon as turn 3 if your board is able to shut your opponent down, but even if it's not, you have the grind ability to play the long game pretty successfully against control decks, as well as the added benefit that all of your monsters activate their effects in grave, meaning you're not going to get screwed too hard by those pesky Eldritch players and their skill drain. Finally, this deck is so much fun to play. Like, it's super versatile, the games often play out pretty differently because they can be so fast or so slow, and the fact that you can come back from absolutely nothing if you just have a bit of setup in the graveyard feels fantastic. But unfortunately, it can't all be sunshine and roses for a deck as ban-list bullied as Orcust. Because of all the hits, the deck has lost a lot of its ability to extend through disruption. Oftentimes, if you don't have a card by the grave, a well-timed Ash Blossom on a Foolish Burial type effect, or even worse, on a Harp Horror, puts you in a situation where the only play you have left is to hit the end turn button and hope to raw your opponent can't kill you. That doesn't feel great. Also, the deck doesn't brick often, but when it does, the bad hands are really bad. You can get stuck with either 15 normal summons and no plays, or even worse, a bunch of Orcusts in hand with no way to set them up into the graveyard. The deck is built to avoid hands like that, but when it happens, it's not pretty. And finally, it is possible to get punished for your weak end board. Double Fog Blade is nothing to scoff at, but for decks that don't care about an on-field monster negate, you can often struggle to really disrupt their plays, and may struggle to play through whatever stuff they put on board on your next turn. All in all, Orcust is still a very fun deck that has enough power in it to climb up the ladder and do well for you in Master Duel. But unfortunately, it's gonna struggle against the very top decks, and is not gonna be as good for you as something like a Drytron or an Eldritch would be. unfortunately, this deck is not going to be able to return to its former glory unless Konami lifts the ban list boot off its neck a little bit, but in the end, maybe it's good Orcust has been reduced to this, a fairly playable, almost rogue deck that's a lot of fun to play, rather than being let to dominate the game for another year. So with that, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please do leave a like on this video, or subscribe if you want to see more content, I would really appreciate that. And now I will leave you with this replay to finish out, with one final message. Konami, please free Harp Horror, I deserve it.